Le pido al compañero Héctor López que por favor venga al frente. ¿Necesita el micrófono?
Sí, yo creo.
¿Quiere decir que puede pararse acá?
Sí, ok. Bueno.
¿Se puede levantar, por favor?
¿Y qué quieren que cante?
La brinqueña.
Bueno, yo voy a cantar una danza.
Sí, esa es.
Que es la brinqueña.
Ok.
No, que, bueno. ¿Sueno bien aquí? Sí, muy bien. Bien, ok. De pie puertorriqueño, que han dado la señal. Despierta de ese sueño que es hora de luchar. A ese llamar patriótico no arde tu corazón. Ven, no será simpático el ruido del cañón. Nosotros queremos la libertad, nuestros machetes nos la darán. Vámonos, borinqueños, vámonos ya, que nos espera ansiosa la libertad, la libertad, la libertad, la libertad, la libertad.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Buenas noches. Voy a tratar algo nuevo con esta invención. Tenemos una agenda bastante amplia, así que voy a hacer unos breves comentarios. Mi nombre es Iris Morales, and on behalf of the Boricua Movement History Live, it's a group that's been meeting for about 2 years. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight. And I take this opportunity, first of all, to thank the People's Forum and the staff for making the space available to us, and also for the gracious assistance of the staff here in helping us put together the details for the event. This past July, the Young Lords organization celebrated the 50th anniversary of its founding in New York. To mark this historic event, thank you. To mark this historic event, we decided that the best way we could do this would be to bring people together to discuss Puerto Rican activism in the United States since the late 60s and its future. Obviously, this is an enormous topic, and there's a lot of interest, and it's impossible to cover everything that can be said about this in one forum. Our intention is to spark dialogue across generations. The presentations, therefore, will be short in order to allot time for discussion. Given the world situation and the urgency to fight the accelerating climate crisis in particular, we want to encourage involvement on all of these issues. Let me begin by stating the obvious. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, and Boricuas have been targets of stolen lands, forced displacement, and state violence for generations. The vast number of Puerto Ricans living in the US have migrated and continue to arrive as a result of persisting colonial policies on the island. Today, more Puerto Ricans live in the US, about 5 million compared with about 3 million on the island itself. United by family, culture, and history, the struggles of Puerto Ricans in the United States and on the island are closely interrelated. Puerto Rico's battle against US domination and control has been long and fierce. The fight for national self-determination was renewed this summer when islanders took to the streets and forced a corrupt governor to resign. The struggle of Puerto Ricans in the United States has also been long and fierce. Boricuas have had to fight for every right and progress we've achieved. We've battled racism, economic exploitation, police violence, lack of health care and education, and all other social ills that you can imagine. Still, census reports show that Puerto Ricans have among the highest poverty and incarceration rates in this country. Given these realities, how should we move forward? Tonight's panel looks at examples of how Puerto Rican communities in the United States have organized to achieve justice. We'll begin with the Puerto Rican Socialist movement of the late 60s and 70s, specifically focusing on the Young Lords Party, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, and el Comité-MINP. Victor Quintana, Carmen Vivian Rivera, and Jose Velasquez will outline the ideals, challenges, and legacies of this movement. Their statements reflect a collective evaluation and analysis by former members of the three organizations. This is a collective presentation, not individual organizations. After these presentations, Iram Rivera Malcano and Teresa Basilio Gastambide will share their experiences as activists and organizers. They'll speak about the changing context and circumstances for Puerto Ricans in the US and the impact these changes have had on organizing so that we may fully understand the interlocking systems of oppressions that are at play. In general, the panel will make visible some key concerns and strategies of Puerto Ricans organizing in the United States and identify new challenges that we face. Please refer to the panelists' bios in your materials. I will not read them to save time. You'll also find information about BMHL and other things there as well. We thank the many notes of interest that we've received for tonight's forum and look forward to the exchange at the end. Those who would like to help organize more events like this, please contact us. Our email address, I believe, is in the materials. Now it is my sincerest pleasure to present my friend and dear comrade, Victor Quintana, who will give a historical overview of the 60s movements.
Thank you, Iris. Buenas noches, good evening. Tonight, hopefully, and I know some of you in the room, but I don't know most of you, hopefully you're going to learn things about the Young Lords Party, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, and el Comité de Movimiento de la Izquierda Nacional Puertorriqueño that you didn't know, didn't appreciate, and perhaps didn't understand. Hopefully we'll address those three today. However, it is important to note that our organizations were not the only radical Puerto Rican organizations in the 1960s and 70s. But however, in order to understand the rise of these organizations, it is important to grasp the political, social, and cultural moment in which they emerged and declined. Since the birth of the United States, it has been a limited democracy with expansionist goals. The United States has always had an imperialist agenda. These two features a limited democracy, and imperialism have, along with capitalism and racism, shaped the history of this country. In 1946, after World War II, the United States was the world's primary military and economic superpower. Militarily, the Soviet Union was a distant second, and Europe and Japan were faced with rebuilding their devastated industrial infrastructure. And China was embroiled in a civil war between the nationalist forces of Chiang Kai-shek and those of Mao Zedong's Communist People's Army. In the 1950s, the dominant message of the United States mass media, as well as educational, religious, and cultural institutions, was to portray the United States as a paragon of democracy, of freedom, and of technical innovations. Other countries and societies were depicted as deficient in one respect or another. In the 1960s and 70s, this narrative was rejected by robust social justice movements. The social justice activism and organizing during those decades was a rejection of the politics and social values of the 1950s, which emphasized rabid anti-communism and a cultural environment that placed a premium on conformity in political beliefs, lifestyles, and cultural practices. The social movements of the 60s and 70s were many. African American civil rights organizers and activists denouncing and dismantling key aspects of American apartheid, laws and practices. Black power organizers exposing the role of white supremacy, capitalism, and imperialism in enslaving black people for centuries. Anti-poverty organizers were calling for publicly funded programs to put masses of people to work. Anti-war protesters were opposing the Vietnam War for its racist and imperialist goals. Puerto Rican independence supporters were revitalizing and ruthlessly repressed independence movement. Women were rejecting and demanding an end to unequal treatment in society in both private and public issues. Rank and file workers were organizing to obtain workplace democracy. Young people were promoting new social and cultural values about sex, drugs, and family. And gay and lesbian organizers and people were demanding that their rights be respected and acknowledged. The 60s were also decades in which Marxism and anti-imperialism gained followers and influence. Across the country, scores of organizations declared themselves to be guided by Marxist-Leninist principles of organization and a commitment to revolutionary goals and strategies. The most prominent of these organizations was the Black Panther Party, which was founded in 1966 as the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in order to combat police brutality in California, particularly in the Bay Area. In a relatively brief period, the Panthers adopted a radical 10-point program and Marxism as their guiding ideology and methodology. The possibility of achieving radical economic and social change was particularly animated by the struggles for national liberation of social movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, which advocated for socialism and were anti-imperialists. The struggles of the peoples of Cuba, Vietnam, Palestine, and South Africa for national liberation, which were both anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist, had a critical influence in winning converts to Marxism. It was a moment in which young people, like today, believed that revolutionary change was necessary and achievable. In addition, the arguments of the African American civil rights movement about the breadth and depth of racism in this country emboldened other communities to organize for their economic and social rights. Puerto Rican social justice activists were among those who were motivated to organize, as well as Chicanos, Asian Americans, and Native communities. The Young Lords Party, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, and the Comité-MINP were all part of this upsurge of organizing, not just organizing, but militant organizing. In the 60s and 70s, it is important to note that the emergence of these political, social, and economic justice movements were viewed by alarm by key sectors of corporate America, especially organizations like the National Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable, as well as their academic defenders and practically all politicians. To those interests, these movements threaten corporate profits by generating grassroots demands from Congress to more vigorously regulate the practices of giant corporations. During this period, United States corporations also were challenged for market domination, better said, by corporations in Japan and Europe who had rebuilt by the 60s after the devastation of World War II. This competition was affecting the bottom line of American corporations. To meet these challenges, corporate America started to move production to anti-union southern states and abroad to save labor costs and to institute new technologies to increase productivity. An aroused working class responded to these actions. As a result, corporate America, along with its political and media allies, unleashed a divide and conquer and scapegoating campaign. Key enemies were Black people demanding equality and fairness in employment, housing and education, and anti-war activists who were demanding the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. In 1968, Richard Nixon won the presidency using this strategy of divide and conquer. From the 1970s to today, corporate America has been focused on a take no prisoners campaign to oppose any mass movements or politicians that challenge or question the paradigm of capitalist social relations. Whether it's health care for all or other efforts that emphasize people over corporate profits, such as the Green New Deal proposal, which seeks to affect income and wealth inequality and climate disruption, these people-oriented demands are met with intense opposition and ridicule. We are possibly living in the beginning of another robust social justice movement moment. As Dee mentioned, in July, the Puerto Rican people succeeded in unseating an immoral, austerity-focused, and, as she said, incompetent governor, Ricardo Rosselló. However, just last week, millions of people, particularly kids and youngsters, took to the streets to demand to address climate disruption. In the United States, many communities are rising to demand justice, particularly those fighting for immigrant rights, those demanding action on the climate crisis, and those confronting white supremacist violence. I will end by saying a slogan that comes out of the South: another world is needed, another world is possible. Carmen, I want to turn over to Carmen Vivian, who will continue our narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Good evening, everybody. It is against the backdrop that Victor describes that the reemergence of Puerto Rican radicalism takes place. It's important to note that the movements of the 60s and 70s that we participated in arose from a long history of social and political struggle in the Puerto Rican diaspora, going back to the early 20th century. This second generation of Puerto Ricans, born and or raised in cities across the United States, became a part of a more militant movement. Our organizations understood the conditions of our community and the labor force, increasing disintegration and physical abandonment of our neighborhoods, lack of access to quality health care and educational opportunities, low wages, abusive working conditions and unemployment, police brutality, and the violation of our basic human rights. We set out to confront and dismantle a system that dehumanized the Puerto Rican people. To achieve this, we understood that we needed to establish organizational structures where we lived and worked that would give rise to a mass movement. We worked collectively using multiple strategies that involved civil disobedience, street protests and rallies, mass mobilizations. In many instances, we successfully disrupted the operations of the institutions that were failing us. Our day-to-day organizing included door-to-door tenant organizing, workplace organizing, political education circles, film screenings, cultural events, publishing and selling newspapers, press conferences, producing pamphlets, comics, and books, to name a few. When the health institutions meant to serve our communities failed to address their needs, our organizers, often accompanied by medical students and technicians, conducted their own tests, exposing the high incidences of lead poisoning and tuberculosis. Hospital takeovers and media exposure led to the creation of preventive health programs like the Lincoln Detox Program and the building of a new Lincoln Hospital, and to legislation requiring landlords to remove lead-based paint from tenement walls. We aligned with progressive and left forces to end sterilization abuse of Puerto Rican and other poor and women of color by working with the Committee to End Sterilization Abuse, CESA. In November 1975, the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation established guidelines to be applied in all of the city's public hospitals. The HHC guidelines were based on the recommendations made by an ad hoc advisory committee that included Dr. Helen Rodriguez-Trias, CESA, and members of other reproductive rights organizations. In what follows, I will give some examples of successes, some led by a specific organization, some the outcome of coalitional efforts of our 3 organizations, and still other organizations and formations were also often part of these achievements. The fight for affordable housing produced tenant strikes and a squatters movement in New York City known as Operation Move-In. More than 200 families protested the city's plan to remove low-income residents by occupying buildings targeted for demolition. After 18 months of protests, dozens of families were able to obtain ownership of the apartments they occupied. In Boston, the movement to fight the Boston Redevelopment Authority's urban renewal plan led to the creation of Inquilinos Boricuas en Acción, IBA, that established their own housing plan and the development of Villa Victoria housing in the south end of Boston. IBA and Villa Victoria continue to exist today. When the Emergency Financial Control Board, created during New York City's financial crisis of 1975, proposed closing Hostos Community College, a student takeover with wide support from the community and movement organizations prevented its closing. Today, Hostos Community College continues to thrive. During the same period, the Coalition in Defense of Puerto Rican and Hispanic Rights led a community and worker coalition to save Metropolitan Hospital in El Barrio, which the Koch administration had threatened to close. The threat of closing Gouverneur Hospital in the Lower East Side was also thwarted. In Hartford, Connecticut, a 1974 proposal financed by the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration projected fencing off dozens of streets predominantly populated by Puerto Ricans and blacks. We organized protests in City Hall, filed a lawsuit, and quashed the proposal that would have effectively barricaded our community. Our movement identified allies and built coalitions at the tactical and strategic level to either lead or join successful campaigns. We put the demand for Puerto Rico's decolonization on the agenda of progressive and left forces in the United States. At May Day and International Women's Day rallies across the country, calls for Puerto Rico's liberation abounded. Our organizations joined forces to demand freedom for the Puerto Rican nationalists and all political prisoners. In 1979, when President Jimmy Carter pardoned Lolita Lebrón, Rafael Cancel Miranda, Irving Flores, and Oscar Collazo, we celebrated a unitary welcome at St. Paul's the Apostle Church in Manhattan and other cities such as Chicago. By that time, Andres Figueroa Cordero had been released earlier because of a terminal illness. From the 1970s on, our organizations joined forces in support of the demand that the US Navy abandon Vieques. May 2003 marked the victory of this grassroots movement led by the people of Vieques against the US Navy. We were part of a national solidarity movement against US militarism and in support of people around the world fighting for national sovereignty and democratization. We fought for and got bilingual education programs with big wins in District 3 on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in Brentwood, and Patchogue, Long Island, securing bilingual education programs. The Por los Niños campaign in the Lower East Side won parent community representation on the local school board for Puerto Ricans, blacks, and Asians that had been excluded for years. We organized a movement to pressure WNET, which is now PBS, to include quality and representative programming on our communities, which resulted in the long-running PBS program Realidades. And we joined national mobilizations in defense of affirmative action, programs and other previously won reforms that came under attack in the early 1980s, including attacks on unions and workers' rights. These are just some of the successful actions and campaigns that our movement was a part of, while some struggles continued on into the 21st century. What we learned from our experience and the legacy we leave is what we now will hear from Jose.
Thank you, Vivian. As a group, we felt it important to not only talk about accomplishments, but to realistically look at some of the shortcomings and legacy of the Puerto Rican movement. And tonight, we're being very short. I'm only going to note some of these without much detail, because we really want to hear from you, as Edith Morales pointed out. To begin, we must admit that the idea of revolution around the corner led to many errors in strategy and tactics that steadily moved our organizations away from our base of support. Our organizations did not have a sober and rigorous assessment of the ability of the United States ruling class to shift its economic, political, and ideological strategies. We in the left spent too much time theoretically explaining the failures of capitalism and not enough time addressing the immediate needs of the people. Unfortunately, we also failed to view the strategic importance of unity among the revolutionary groups in the Puerto Rican left. Sectarianism was the order of the day. The governance model of democratic centralism, especially as practiced by the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and the Young Lords, was heavy on centralism and woefully light on democracy. The frenetic pace of our political activity and its demands on members often led to burnout and retreat from political work. On top of these errors, the movement faced severe repression at all levels, including the commanding and ruthless role of COINTELPRO. Despite these shortcomings, as Vivian points out, we tackled big issues of social justice, national liberation, class, racism, and sexism, and struggled to sustain grassroots organizations with few financial resources. Consequently, our movement left a powerful legacy and some lessons for a movement that continues today, some of which I will point out here. Number one, we grappled with the relationship between Puerto Ricans in the U.S. and Puerto Rico, always clear that we remain connected to our country through family and political ties, and continue to support the struggle for decolonization and independence. We also provided an impetus for our Puerto Rican identity, with serious discussion on our African and Taino roots and racism within our own community. Our organizations pushed forward aggressively on gender inequality and women's development as cadre, confronting machismo from within, while articulating a feminist theory within the context of our general oppression. Countless members of the movement helped build educational, women's, and labor organizations, and many Puerto Rican institutions which continue today, while providing leadership in national campaigns against U.S. militarism, for a living wage, immigration reform, police brutality, criminal justice reform, bilingual education, and affirmative action. The movement provided a legacy of thinking critically about our personal, family, and community life. It allowed us to challenge authority, recognize and overcome feelings of fear, and provided self-knowledge, self-worth, and self-esteem. To end, in moving forward, there are many lessons to be learned from the movement. Everything changes, always. People change their thinking when they produce new thoughts themselves through their own internal processes. Dictated or imposed thought is not sustainable. Inclusive democratic processes of debate and decision-making must be continually fomented, monitored, and corrected when undermined. Young people can do much, much more than they or adults think they can. Help others be stronger, healthier, and clearer. You will become stronger, energized, and resilient in the process. Connect with community adults as you would with each other. Use art, music, lyrics, song, dance, and movement in every dimension of organizing. Optimize social media and generate and sustain collaborative efforts. You are the best instrument in the struggle for social justice.
So first off, I just want to say that I'm deeply humbled to be in this space with these people here and with all of you. I'm going to share a little bit about my experiences in the movement and some of my thoughts around it in the hopes that it can just help to guide some, bring some stuff up for folks in the conversation. So thank you for this opportunity. So a little bit about who I am. I was born in Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico, and like many of us, left Puerto Rico when I was a kid, when I was 7, and my family, we moved to Florida. And I've been working in a variety of different sectors throughout my life, but I really came into the movement and came into really like studying and learning about the Puerto Rican movements when I moved to New York, actually, in the mid-90s. And that was also when I started doing work with young people in New York City. And one of the reasons why I did that was because I really wanted to connect with other Boricua youth who I felt a special kinship, because myself growing up, I had not had access to our history. I had not had access to a lot of these conversations. I didn't know about all of this. And so that impacted who I felt, who I was, and who I thought we were. And so I really wanted to be in conversation with other young people. And so that's why I moved into that work. And so the work that I did with young people was mostly around media, and we did also political education work and leadership development. And I really believe very strongly that culture and media and winning people's hearts and minds is still a central part of the struggle. And so I continue on that path. So for me, I've done that in a variety of ways, because I feel like my work with young people has been really critical, but it isn't the only part of it, right? Like, I've also been working with other diaspora members to think about how do we, as the very broad, because we're all over the place, right? How do we really connect to each other? How do we strategize? And how do we build together? And so one of the things that we worked on with I worked on it with other Boricuas and also folks in the archipelago, was a Puerto Rico-Detroit Solidarity Exchange and in Detroit. And the idea behind that was to really be in conversation, Boricua diaspora members who are organizers and cultural workers, with other folks in also from the archipelago, and also Black allies and activists and organizers in Detroit, and to really think about how are our struggles connected, what can we learn from each other, and how can we build together. And then I also have done some work around communications justice and technology in Puerto Rico. And so I want to just say a little bit about some of the challenges that I think a lot of us from my generation and beyond have faced. So, all the things that were said about the conditions that Puerto Ricans faced is still true today. And we're still, in the lowest rungs of the US social structure. And there's also here in New York City, which is my home, there's a lot of concern around the displacement, the consistent displacement of our communities. And that to me is a really critical piece, because we're facing the displacement from Puerto Rico. We face displacement when we come here. There's a constant, sense of precarity, right? And so part of what I've been thinking about is what happens when our communities are uprooted from the places where they build community, where they build, these meaningful relationships, and what do we need to do to hold on to these? And I'm really want to uplift all the work of folks fighting in Sunset Park and in the Bronx in particular right now to try to hold on to some of these neighborhoods. And just to say, too, that an ongoing challenge has been, and this really, I learned a lot about this through my work with young people, because I was working mostly with like Black and brown young people, immigrant youth, and queer and trans and gender nonconforming young people. And a consistent issue that they all faced was policing and criminalization. And that's continued to be a huge problem, a huge issue that impacts, our young people. Not only are they being criminalized, they're being denied access to education, they're being denied a sense of possibility. And so, to me, that fight around policing and criminalization is a key one that we really need to be having more conversations around. So I'm hoping that that'll be part of the conversation tonight. And then I want to talk about the piece that, a lot of folks talk about the nonprofit industrial complex, and I think a lot has been said and written about it, so I'm not going to hop on that bandwagon, but, it's a problem. But I will say, the one piece that I feel like we do need to talk more about is what's been the impact of the lack of these organizations, the lack of revolutionary organizations, the lack of places for praxis or theory, for, to really engage with each other in a disciplined way. It's impacted me, it's impacted a lot of folks that I know from, our generation, and we want that, we want that, and we're trying to figure out how to make that happen in this moment. So I want to call that out. And then just in terms of, really quickly, just the differences that mark this time, I think we've already just said it. Obviously, the climate emergency is huge. But I think technology, I want to talk about technology for a second, because I'm working in technology right now. We're in this state of very high-tech surveillance, and surveillance that's been normalized to the extent that everything is, we're just accepting more and more. Like now we have Ring, right? And we have all these facial recognition systems and the electronic monitoring, so digital prisons. And so I think, to me, having gone through the 2000s and having seen kind of the initial beginnings of the internet and what people thought of like possible revolutionary opportunities to organize using the internet, and now it's become a slightly more dystopian vision of what's happening. But I think we do have power here, and we do have the ability to really think through how to fight these moments, right? And so there's been a lot of work, and I want to, again, just uplift the work of technologists in the movement, who are doing work around digital self-defense tools and organizing, and also understanding that this is also a critical tool, again, in winning people's hearts and minds. Like, we really need to use these tools for our people. And then the last thing I'll say that has also really uplifted me and the folks that I work with is an emphasis on how do we engage in principled struggle with each other when harm is done? So really thinking through healing justice is one way that people talk about it. There's a lot of different kinds of terms out there, but I think the point of that is that oppression causes harm, and it causes generational harm, individual harm, collective harm. And there's been an amazing amount of work, and a lot of it led by queer folks, a lot of it led by Black women, to really address the long-term effects of the trauma and harm that our communities experience. And so I know that was an issue. It's always been an issue, right, in our movements, to think through principled struggle. And so that's another piece that I'm looking for, and perhaps there's people in here who do that kind of work, to just really uplift why that's important to us moving forward. So I think that's all I'll say.
Cool. I don't have a prepared statement because I'm not good at prepared statements, but I have it on my phone because it's 2019. No. So, my name is Iran Rivera, long-time organizer, primarily working with high school students, training high school students how to do organizing around social justice issues like education, criminal justice, and juvenile justice issues. I am also a member of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, Junta here in New York, active in the Puerto Rican movement since 1933. Yeah? I'm gonna start singing like Don Hector. Okay. I'm not a singer, I don't know this stuff. All right. And also a member of the Malcolm X grassroots movement. I came to this work, and specifically the Puerto Rican struggle, when I was 19 years old, back in 1996, around the issue of the Puerto Rican political prisoners. Before that, I was politicized, though, through the Nation of Islam and the black struggle. When my parents in New Haven, Connecticut, where I was raised, moved my brother and I in the 90s out of the city into the suburbs so we wouldn't become Latin kings. And I got called nigger so many times for the 4 years that I didn't know what else to do. And after seeing Malcolm X the movie, my mom said, hey, I know them, and off I was. In 1996, I started coming out here to New York City to learn more about the political prisoner movement, specifically the events that were hosted by Pro Libertad and the other organizations at that time, and that started me on my work. The importance of time, place, and conditions can't be emphasized enough, right? And so at that time, I grew up in the 80s, in Ronald Reagan 80s, George Bush Sr., and became politically active under what was then referred to as the first black president, Bill Clinton, right? And for me, that was the thing. And for me, was also the ushering in of the right wing of the Democratic Party with his 94 criminal law bill, the attacks on welfare, right, and so forth and so forth. Because of the COINTELPRO violence, because of the oppression and the blowback from the state on the veterans of the movements that came before us, a lot of those organizations didn't exist anymore, and especially in Connecticut, right? Unlike New York City, where New York has always had an active movement, celebrations like this, remembering the history, remembering the culture, Connecticut had a very different way of moving, right? A lot of it, I assume, had to do with the actions of La Machetero in Hartford back in the 80s, but back then, right, we just didn't talk about it. We knew who were kind of like involved with independent stuff, but it wasn't something that you spoke about. It wasn't until 2004, when I was sworn into the Nationalist Party here, that the elders in Connecticut then were like, okay, he's safe, right, and were able to talk to me. It was a very different security culture that existed as a result of that time. The other thing that I remember also was that the movement moved towards more of a civil rights struggle. And the emphasis was on, well, two-pronged, right? One was on electing Puerto Rican elected officials and politicians into our cities, right? So the mayor of Hartford, city council folks here in New York, Gutierrez in Illinois, right? And that this was supposed to be a symbol of progress, and they were supposed to bring about change for our folks. As we know, those civil rights victories didn't bring about much change for our people, right? Until this day, having Puerto Rican elected officials doesn't really do much for the Puerto Rican population, right? The other thing was the importance and the proliferation of nonprofit organizations. Not to get into the pros and cons of nonprofit organizations, right? But one thing that's very, very distinct about the nonprofit industrial complex, right, is that it takes social justice movements, it takes the work and it silos it, right, into funded sectors. And so therefore, what once was a social justice movement became an education field, a policing field, a housing field, right, and kind of split everybody up. And so as a young person coming up, right, there weren't organizations that were there that could house or space to provide political education, to provide that political development, right, and to guide us towards a revolutionary consciousness, right? We kind of had to just go on our own. Fortunate for us, the popular culture at that time, right, in the late 80s and early 90s, was very much on the fight to power, literally, right, theme. And so a lot of us learned through that. So Puerto Ricans from my generation grew up very Puerto Rican and proud to be Puerto Rican, but also culturally African American, right? And we're very proud of that as well. And because we grew up in a time, in a changing New York City, with the gentrification, with Puerto Ricans starting to leave towards the 2000s, and with the housing crisis, and post-September 11th, right, where the domestic surveillance state came down, a lot of that started to change, that our movements and a lot of us also became very close to other movements and the other activists, right? We became very good at understanding Dominican palo and merengue and you know, las mariposa and all those folks as well, right? Without losing our connection to the Puerto Rican movement, right? With the organizations that came out of the police and stuff, and trained organizers that came out of these movements, right? A lot of us were trained and became community organizers. So folks like Richie Perez, right, whose legacy extends far beyond New York City, because we've even heard of him out in Connecticut, right, became community organizers, and that's been my trade, is community organizers. That was the way that you give back. That was the way that you fight back, right? We grew up idolizing you folks. We grew up idolizing. Till this day, I brag about, I have Edith Morales' phone number in my phone, and I can text her right now, right? And that makes me cool. But in that idolizing, right? In that idolizing of the past, right, which was very much a part of our generation, right? We knew Edie's, right? We knew the story of Carlito and being the bodyguard for Sylvia Rivera. We knew all these different stories of the takeover of Ostos and Lincoln Hospital and the garbage strikes and everything. You name it, we knew it. We could memorize it. We know your histories probably better than you remember them, right? We all wanted to be Don Pedro. We wanted to be Lolita. We idolized and deified individuals, and oftentimes at the expense of our own voice, at the expense of our own ideas, at the expense of our own, because we were good soldiers and we were good, right? We were prepared to be the next wave, right? That the next time it came, right, we'd be able to take over the Statue of Liberty. Ponce's not here, right? But the party members, the Nationalist Party members, and all those folks who were involved in that, right? We wanted to be the next ones, right? And we prepared for that, and we stayed silent, and we listened, and we followed orders, and that moment never came. And you talk about the burnout, and you talk about the leaving, right, leaving space. My generation in the 90s, I refer to them as yelders, right? Because we're too young to be elders, we're too old to be young people, and we're this bridge sort of generation that has a foot in both sides, right? And me now at 42 trying to figure out, what does that role mean, right? Because moving forward, and I'm sorry if I'm speaking really fast, I don't know what the time is or whatever, right? Is that everything has changed. Puerto Ricans are spread out. The diaspora is split into two. There's a traditional diaspora, right? Those of us who were born and raised here and have been generations here, who now don't only live in New York, right? New York is not the Mecca anymore, right? We're in Florida, we're in Texas, California, Colorado, South Carolina, right? That changes the organizing dynamic. What does that mean now, right? What does that mean when you have Puerto Ricans who are going to be raised and grow up in Nevada, in Wisconsin, right? What does that mean? What does that mean now when we have hundreds of thousands of climate refugees who are coming from Puerto Rico, now they're first generation diaspora, who don't have a connection here, right? Whose roots aren't here, who are not culturally African American like us as well, right? And who are still tied to Puerto Rico and only want to know about Puerto Rico and going back to Puerto Rico. The stories of my grandparents, right? That know one day we're going to go back, and they never went back, right? And how do we deal with that dynamic as well, right? How do we deal with the dynamic that now nonprofit organizations have become the leaders of movement? And now they have gone all the way to Puerto Rico, right? With the hundreds and millions of dollars that they have, right? And are changing the dynamic and changing the way that it moves. And one way that it looks like is that you can talk about social justice issues, right? You can talk about housing and climate and destroying the gender binary and all these very important things without ever talking about the status question of Puerto Rico. You can talk about decolonization without talking about the independence of Puerto Rico, right? And what ends up being left is that there's a lot of folks from the generations before who are stuck and don't know how to do anything else and keep doing the same thing over and over. We've been very good at mobilizations, but not organizing. We can call rallies and march in front of empty buildings, right? But not step back and synthesize what is going on, all the different issues, and come up with an analysis, right? That the movements now and the young people who are coming in now, who are coming out of the universities, right? Because the factories don't exist, right? It's not that sort of dynamic. They're coming out of universities with all kinds of education, language, new frameworks, new way of looking at the world, right? But there's still no organization that can hold them, right, to develop that revolutionary consciousness. And so what we rely on now is the spontaneity of the masses, right? In which, for those of you, and I'm not going to try to get into that battle with you, right? But Lenin spoke about that, right? And the wrongs of that, right? Of trying to follow behind the people in their spontaneous struggle and thinking that just the spontaneity of just people's uprisings was going to somehow create revolutionary consciousness free of an organization or free of those spaces to be able to do that for them. And it fails and it fails and it fails. With the technology and the increased surveillance state, right? The days of we're going to go underground no longer exist. Our headphones record everything. The street lights record what we're saying, right? Everything you do is being recorded at all times, right? But it doesn't mean that we can't do that work. And for me, what I'm trying to figure out is in my role of understanding the young folks, understanding their frustrations, understanding their desperation, right? As climate change becomes very real. And the Caribbean, right? The Prime Minister of Barbados said it, right? The Caribbean is not going to survive. Colonialism has stripped everything from our countries that has left them unprepared and inadequately prepared to defend themselves from climate change, right? Eco-fascism is on the rise. The right is all into environmentalism, and they're all heading inland, and they're going up. So when the floods come, right, they can set up walls and leave us out to fend for ourselves. And for me, I have to think now, right, what is the Puerto Rican movement? And is it now just the Puerto Rican movement? Is trying to free Puerto Rico enough if we have now entered a whole new world, right? We live in a historical moment where fascism is winning and winning everywhere. China is no longer communist, right? It's capitalist. Russia is no longer is capitalist, right? Everywhere you go, they're winning. And it creates this deep sense of desperation. Twitter and social media giving everybody a platform and saying everything as soon as it just comes out of their brains, causing disruptions, and no one is building relationships with each other, right, anymore, and having those dialogues. And I feel like there's still an opportunity to do that. I feel like my generation is, and when I say my generation, I'm talking about the 30s, early 40s, right, to figure that out. How to create those spaces? How do we bring the wisdom and the knowledge and experience of those who came before us and match it with the experiences and the knowledges, right, and the new frameworks and the creativity of the young people who came after us, right, in a way that will contribute not only to saving Puerto Rico and freeing Puerto Rico, but the whole world. And I'm done.
Incredible. You guys were awesome. So before Iram had to speak down because I had said it for me, and I'm about 5'1" still. Well, I think that you were awesome and that we did what we set out to do. We wanted to pose some questions, give some background, and give a sense of the changing nature of the Puerto Rican people in the United States. I guess we started to think about that all of our organizing in the last 20 years had been around issues related to Puerto Rico, and of course, we all repeated the connection, the fact that we're here as a colonial people, and we will, our situation will always relate to Puerto Rico as well as to what we're doing here. But we're also thinking about the high rates of incarceration and poverty and how some of our issues get lost then. And so we felt we wanted to have a conversation that would begin to look at our organizing over generations and take into account the differences that I think everybody has pointed to. I just want to highlight some of the changed circumstances for Puerto Ricans, and then I want to open it up to comments. So that, first of all, we've grown. We're spread out across the United States. We have more Puerto Ricans in the United States than in Puerto Rico, as I mentioned earlier. When we were organizing, we used to talk about 1/3 of the Puerto Rican nation in the United States and 2/3 on the island. Now it's reverse. We have multiple generations of Puerto Ricans in this country. Some speaking only English, some speaking only Spanish, and then everything in between. We have people coming at different times, as Iram said, so that we have a situation where people have a different relationship to this country. And as you know, we were shaped, many of us were shaped first in the African American community, in the African American civil rights struggle. And we have generations now that come straight from Puerto Rico, and they have a different experience in terms of building relationships and coalitions in this country. We have a changing working class. And that's a situation not just for Puerto Ricans, but that's a situation that's been happening since the 70s, since we were organizing. I like this idea of we're now relying on spontaneity in our social movements, which makes me think about that, you know, our organizations are kind of fluid, the organizations that we do have, and that the organizations, I also like that idea of siloed. And the last thing I want to leave with is that our young people are suffering and are really in crisis. Everything, you know, everything is precarious. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know if you're going to be able to go to school. If you go to school, you don't know if you can pay for school. You know, you don't know if you can get a job. If you're sick, if the doctor tells you to take a pill, should you take it? You know. We don't know our history. We're not represented in what we see around us. So at every level, our young people are really suffering, and that is key to how we want to think about how we move forward. So I want to end there. And again, please thank them, because they did a great job and they pretty much stuck to the time. So I believe that Zoilo and Jaime are going to help me with the comments, question and answer. What I'd like to do is to take a number of questions or comments, take a few of them, and then have responses from the panel or from the audience.
Hi, thank you all for coming. I had a question
Wait a second. Zoilo, can you raise your hand, please?
Yeah. Hi.
Okay.
Sure.
Could you state your name, please?
Sure, Maximilian. Thank you all for coming. My question is about how voter discrimination and voter suppression has evolved, and how your organizations help combat that, both from the 60s till now. Because the only research that I understand was that there were also literacy tests, you know, even for Puerto Ricans back then. So if you could comment about that, yeah.
Okay. No, wait a second. I want to prioritize the young people first. The younger folks first. Okay.
Yes. Where do you see Puerto Rico in 20 years?
Thank you.
Are you a younger person? I know
It's all
you.
relative. He handed it to me.
No, Jaime. If there's a younger person, let's.
First time my age has been called out. That's right.
I know you, that's why.
Abuelito.
If there's not a younger person, then, okay.
I just want to say thank you so much. I love the presentations. I particularly appreciated the very open, candid critique of the movement. A lot of great points. One of the places where I thought you were going, though, which I don't think I heard, was about vision. We have critique, but I wondered whether there's a sense of whether we have established in the past and even today enough of the vision for what we want, and if that has been enough of a motivation. And is there an issue for that? And if some of you could speak to maybe what is that vision? Thank you.
Okay. Lillian?
I'm afraid to speak because I'm one of the old timers. My name is Lillian, but this is not working. So my name is Lillian Jimenez, and my question is that you talked a lot about the obstacles and the challenges, and a lot about the deficits, right? What we didn't do, what we couldn't do. And I'm really wondering about what are the assets in this historical moment? What are the assets that we all have to work with? And what are the conditions that make it ripe for organizing? We didn't come out of the sky. We came out of a series of conditions that were already elaborated on. So I'm just really wondering, and what are those assets and those conditions that allow for organizing at this moment in time, given the context and the reality that we're dealing with?
Okay. This young woman here. Jaime. Tell. No. I called. There's a young woman here. I called on her. Yeah. I'm just going to call.
I think that's me. I think a question I have, and something I've been grappling with, is that as a born and raised Puerto Rican, right? Like, I really struggle with how to show solidarity and support for folks who are still living on the island. And like, what is the ways that I can make successful interventions around that support without them feeling like, oh, it's just another mainland coming to the island to tell us how to do X, Y, and Z. And so, yeah, I would love to hear just some wisdom or ideas around how can we build our solidarity between folks, those of us who live on the mainland and those who are still living in PR.
Okay. There was the woman in blue. You?
Thank you.
Oh, you. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Oh, good. Well, I just want to say I'm not as young as I look. And I wanted to ask Teresa, because in terms of this last comment or question, that there are these really incredible models, and specifically things that are going on in the island right now, post-Maria. And so if maybe you could give some examples, because I know you've been working with people on the island, and so just to give us also that idea about some of the incredible things that are going on right now.
That's my
Okay.
sister.
Yeah. Okay, gracias.
Okay. Before I go, I want to say something. I'm mad. And you know why? Because people keep saying that the U.S. is the mainland of Puerto Rico. Our mainland is Puerto Rico, not the United States.
Nobody said that.
No way. Hi. Thank you. I want Yarimar Bonilla, and I wanted to ask Iram. There was a lot that you said that really struck with me, maybe because I'm in the same generation of the Yelders. So two things, and I was wondering if you could maybe put them together. One was I was really struck about how you spoke so in such a kind of moving way about this generation that in many ways, you know, put aside their own voice and their own vision to kind of uphold the visions of the past and celebrate the heroes of the past. And how at the current moment, this current generation doesn't seem to be doing that, and how that might relate to also this question of can we deal with all the issues of corruption and you know, gender violence and all these other topics that seem to be at the forefront of, young people's struggles in Puerto Rico right now while putting aside the status question, or at least not dealing with it in the way that a previous generation dealt with. So I just wanted, if you could connect those two strands of your comments.
El compañero aquí. Sí.
Bueno, mi nombre es Rafael Feliciano. Actualmente soy el secretario de organización de la Federación de Maestros de Puerto Rico. Fui su presidente hace unos años. Fui del Comité Nacional Pro Defensa de Vieques cuando la gente no apoyaba mucho a Vieques. Estuve en Cáncer Federal también. Y fuimos de los grupos que organizamos las entradas al campo de tiro por tierra. Fui miembro del Partido Socialista Revolucionario en principios de los 70. Empecé de jovencito, aunque es que yo me estiro la cara. Fui fundador del Movimiento Socialista de Trabajadores y sigo siendo un revolucionario activo en Puerto Rico. ¿Y cuál es mi aportación? Yo creo que una de las grandes dificultades que tenemos es la comunicación entre el movimiento revolucionario activo y emergente en la isla y los compañeros que están aquí en Nueva York o en la Florida o en otros puntos de la isla. Para darles un ejemplo, varios de nosotros más o menos para junio de este año planteábamos que estamos al borde de una explosión social, que no sabíamos qué la iba a catalizar, o sea, qué la iba a hacer saltar, pero que estaba ahí. En ese momento, si tú estabas en Puerto Rico, la gente decía, aquí no va a pasar nada, y de hecho, cuando hicimos el planteamiento, la gente se rió. Pero llegó julio. ¿Por qué les digo esto? Puerto Rico está en una coyuntura muy especial. Estamos al borde de una segunda explosión social que fácilmente se puede catalizar entre finales de este año y principios del siguiente, porque estamos hablando de que van a tumbarle las pensiones a cerca de 130,000 seres humanos, y estamos hablando de que la Junta de Control Fiscal viene a liquidar la isla porque, perdón es que me haya extendido, voy a usar un solo ejemplo para que puedan entender la situación. Puerto Rico se llamaba inicialmente San Juan, y su puerto Puerto Rico, porque ahí se reunían los galeones de oro y que se llevaban el oro de las Américas para España. Pero un día el imperialismo decidió cambiar la ruta y Puerto Rico se chavó con J. Bueno, en algunos sentidos. para los nativos fue mejor.
Compañero, si puede hacerlo breve.
En este momento estamos en una coyuntura similar. Estados Unidos está recomponiendo su colonia y la ley promesa es una ley habilitadora del nuevo modelo colonial que se basa en la pobreza extrema, donde se quieren lanzar 50,000 personas que reciben cupones a trabajar a 2 pesos la hora. O sea, creo que es fundamental enlazar el movimiento revolucionario activo con el movimiento revolucionario local, donde para mí es central reivindicar el socialismo revolucionario, porque sin eso en el terreno es difícil que avancemos, porque si no hay una meta, un sueño, es difícil que las masas se muevan.
I'm going to take one more comment and then have some report back or answering or...
Saludos, mi nombre es Daniel, yo vengo de Puerto Rico. I'm trying to speak in English because I don't know if everybody here speaks Spanish, but my English is not very good, so excuse, you know. Actually, like what I want to say is more like a comment, not necessarily a question. Okay, yeah, well, I'm gonna do my, I'm gonna try, but yeah, if I feel pressure, I'm gonna start hablando español. So, yeah, I feel like with like Iram, you know, like I feel I'm in the, you said like young, elder, right? Generation. Yeah, I'm kind of like feeling a lot of emotions right now. I'm just coming here to New York. Like I haven't come here very often, and my family and a lot of members of my family are like historically have come to live in the United States. And one thing that I was talking recently with Teresa is like we in Puerto Rico, like maybe know a little bit about our own history of the archipelago, but what so like things that had happened in Puerto Rico, but don't know the rich history of Puerto Ricans here in the United States, like culturally, politically. So that is like a very essential thing. Like we need in Puerto Rico as activists and as revolutionaries to, what Rafi was saying also is very important. Right now, like in Puerto Rico, we don't have strong, political like, leftist or revolutionary groups because of what a lot of things happened in the 70s and the 60s. Burnouts, people just flying outside, a lot of cadres that were made in the 80s, 90s maybe, just come to United States because of the economical situation. So talking a little bit about the nonprofit complex, some of the revolutionary cadres are just going towards that way, I myself included, because we are like seeing that as a way to fund ourselves to be permanent or ¿cómo se dice? Organizadores full-time organizers. So yeah, like in the left, like all the revolutionary groups would need money, and the money is here in the United States. So for the compañera that was asking, like, yeah, like, see, we need to keep to, put in touch, and like for the groups here to try, no sé, como, yeah, we need to get more, como tener más contacto y más relaciones, porque si no nos jodemos, porque si no, los que estamos allí nos venimos para acá o nos vamos para otro lado. Y como decía Rafi, like the junta, it's killing us, and they're just keeping in a very fast pace, using the shock doctrine of María and all the políticas económicas de austeridad. And, like we are trying to keep in track with all that, thing. But yeah, we definitely need your help. And I don't know what it means to be a Puerto Rican here, because I myself, I'm an internationalist. So I believe that, everywhere you go, there is, oppression. So you organize in the place you are. But yeah, we need Boricua's help and people of color help, and everyone, can help us. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, 2 short comments, because I then want to have the panel respond. So I know that you've had your hand up for a while.
Gracias. Mi nombre es Maribel. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm 62 years old. And I'm a Bronx Rican. And it's taken me a lifetime to learn about the history of my people. I know some things, but I'm still learning. And recently, in the last couple of years, is that I've taken an interest in getting involved in the social justice, because I also work in the field in East Harlem. So recently, I posted that I had been at the march that we had last Saturday. And I had a Bronx Rican who now lives in Alabama after living in Puerto Rico. And then a young lady who lived in Puerto Rico is now living here, comment on my page that somebody like me has no business getting involved in the free independence for Puerto Rico, because I've never lived on the island. I don't know what life is like on the island. And it's true, I don't understand the politics, and I don't understand why it's taken all these years for Puerto Rico to determine that they should be an independent nation. That we're still hanging in that balance between statehood, and they threw at me, oh no, 2/3 of the people on the island want statehood, and I'm like, I'm not sure that they know what they're asking for. But then again, the other side argues that if we go independent, we're gonna become another Cuba. And I wonder, how bad is that? They got free healthcare,
Thank you.
free education. But that's a subject for a lot of discussion, so thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to close with Carlito. Make it short.
I'm 66, so but I'm still a young lord, okay? That I take to the grave with me. Sometimes when you look for solutions, for answers, they are within your history. I'm excited right now because el Comité, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, the Young Lords, we're talking business right now. Okay? That's right, we're talking business. And yes, we are all guilty of sectarianism. We were divided, and the man played on our weaknesses, and that was one of our main weaknesses. What I'm trying to get at is that we got the answer before us, how to address what's going on in Puerto Rico, but what is our miserable reality here in the United States? We need organization, and we need fighting organization. That is the bottom line. Okay? Está la cocina, los ingredientes están ahí. We gotta find a way to cook. Okay? And that's the bottom line. Boricuas can make a nice sofrito. Okay? So let's make a nice Boricua sofrito. We already know how fucked up of a situation we're in. Okay? We need to start talking about movement. We need to start talking about organization. We need to start linking police brutality and those racist cops to what they're doing to Boricuas in Puerto Rico. We need to start talking solutions. What is it that we do after this forum here tonight? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to have each panelist take one question that they'd like to address, and then open up to further conversation if we have time. Otherwise, to a little time for mingling, where sometimes people get to make connections. So do you want to start with Victor?
Thanks a lot. I guess I want to go back to our history of our organizations.
Oh.
I want to go back to the history of our organizations because I think you build capacity, you build.
Go ahead.
I just want to go back to the history of our organizations because nothing starts without somebody doing something. So I think one thing, there are people doing things now. I don't know all those people, all those organizations or groups that are out there doing the work that we think needs to be done, the fighting around criminal justice, the fight around housing displacement, the issue of employment, the issue of losing of healthcare. There are people and groups within our organization that are active on these things. We need to identify who those groups are and find out what they're doing and figure out how we can help them, and also begin to engage with them about what is their vision of their work. Where are they going? What do they want to do? And where we can, as an elder, I'm not going to come in with the word of wisdom, but I can help them and point out if they don't have an analysis, which I think is something that we quickly came to determine. We were not going to go forward if we didn't have an understanding of what we were facing. We made strides forward once we decided that we had to do that, and also that we had to learn our history, and we had to equip ourselves with some tools to make analysis that would be effective and successful. So I think that's one thing that I know from our experience we did. But besides analysis, we did things. We disrupted meetings of the local school board. We went as our workers disrupted construction sites and said, this thing is not going to go on unless our people get jobs. We took over X-ray facilities and said this is not happening until our people are dealt with. So I think where we see people doing those kinds of actions, we need to support them. There's no magic to this work, and I'd be disingenuous to think that I don't have the answer. But I know that it starts from action and reflection and making an inventory of what's going on and how we can help what's going on to be effective, more effective than it is now. And going back to Iram and Teresa's points, we have to use, we have to be in touch with how young people are now viewing the world and how we might have to learn from them because they might have a sense of what needs to be done now better than we did. But it's still necessary to take action. And the system doesn't move unless you disrupt it. It doesn't relinquish its power unless it's challenged. And I think that's what happened in Puerto Rico with the people of Puerto Rico when they went to the streets. They said no more, and they challenged it, and they stopped the system, and they got results. I think here we have to figure out how we do that. There's no magic to it, and there's no easy way to do it. And as we learned in our movements, we have to have a long view, because the long view is going to help you to understand what you can do in the moment. It doesn't solve the situation, it doesn't give you socialism or independence, but at least it grounds you in the moment. And as people who have worked in the labor movement know, the boss is the one that gives you the opportunity. And the American imperial hegemony that exists in Puerto Rico is giving the path to Puerto Rico, because conditions now, you either go one way or another. And it becomes now clear that everybody talks about colonialism now, not just the socialists or independentistas. So that's a change in reality. We have to figure out a way to deal with that. And I haven't been, I've talked to some folks in Puerto Rico, and I've heard a lot from Edie's. There are two things going on in Puerto Rico that give me hope. One is the issue of sustainability. All the groups that are becoming involved in work around sustainability and rooting in that at the local level and linking up the local towns and regions in Puerto Rico around the issue of sustainability, that's an important contribution. And those people are politicized people. They're aware of the challenges that they have, and they're political people. The other thing is the whole issue of self-determination and the conversations that are going on in the communities and the assemblies that are taking place. That is democracy from the bottom up. And the answers to building power and building struggle is going to come out of those kinds of processes.
The question you asked was specifically about our generation holding the past up, this younger generation kind of being like, no, we're cool, and what do we do with that? Yeah. How's this? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. In case you haven't figured out, I'm also a clown as an activist. So I think one thing in my experience in working with young people is that we oftentimes frame it as younger folks, right? The younger people, young adults, as not caring or being dismissive or kind of like they want no parts of the past, right? I think that there is this sort of like pseudo-anarchist politic that exists across multiple movements now that is very anti-hierarchy, very anti, right, like authoritarian, this sort of, kill your gods, kill your masters sort of thing. Which is cool, right? Like that's cool in my little anarchist heart that lives in there somewhere, right? But it's not true, right? I think that young people do want to be a part. I think the young people do appreciate the past. They do appreciate everything, all the sacrifices that were made before. What they don't have compared to our generation was this romanticization of martyrdom, right? And we grew up, and I speak for myself, right? That in order to be seen as a real revolutionary and to have the elders see us as you're good, you're okay, to be able to get that call in the middle of the night from Filiberto maybe, right, to come to Puerto Rico, right? That you had to martyr yourself, el valor y sacrificio. Right? And you had to sacrifice everything. And this generation doesn't have that, right? This generation is facing extreme gentrification, debt slavery, right? Closing schools, under minimum wage jobs, right? The climate is washing away with everything, right? That they don't have those notions. So what they ended up doing was flipping it and making space and appreciation for individual stories, individual experiences, individual traumas. Now, free of organizations that can help develop a revolutionary consciousness, sometimes that falls off into petty bourgeois stuff. And with the internet giving you a voice, it ends up being toxic, right? That's not only social media and the young people, but also comes from our mainstream media that stopped giving news and just sensationalized bullshit that's just scaring everybody 24/7, right? And so I think that what needs to happen is that there needs to be some patience. There needs to be more dialogues like this, right, where there are younger people involved. There needs to be spaces where folks can grow together, can learn together, can heal together. We come with traumas. You all pass your beefs on down to us, right? I grew up knowing I shouldn't talk to this person, that person, because I don't know what the fuck happened in 1970, whatever, but, right? That if we do away with that, right, and there's skilled people, right, and intergenerational, and reminding us that we are a part of a chain, right, that this is all a part of a chain, and we're all a part of a chain in a link, right? So people like Espy, who are masters at being able to heal and bring people together to do that, right? Edie's does it well. I mean, there's so many people, and create those spaces and start with the dialogue, and you'll see that the younger people do want to contribute, and they do appreciate the past, and they do, right? What they don't want is to have to sit down, shut up, and follow when their entire world is collapsing, literally, right? But there's no time for that, right? And make that sacrifice that our generation made, right? To our own detriment.
I want to address, there was a question about what should be our role in the diaspora with Puerto Rico, and I think it's also connected to a little bit to what Daniel was saying about, the relationship of Puerto Ricans in the archipelago and not knowing necessarily the history of struggle of the diaspora Puerto Ricans. And I think this also maybe speaks to an opportunity. I think prior to Hurricanes Irma and Maria, when Promesa was passed, when Promesa was put on us, and the junta became the next level of colonial terror, really, in Puerto Ricans. I was horrified, and I was like, what are we going to do about this? And in my relationships with certain people in the archipelago, I wasn't clear what our role should be here. And so for me, like, the opportunity was, let's have conversations, let's be in relationship to each other, let's at least engage and say that we don't know, and not be afraid to do that. And I think in the past, there's been a reticence to engage with each other. And some of that is for reasons of class and race politics. Some of that has been about language, and a lot of it has to do with colonialism. And so we have to really think about not being put in that, not think about it in those kind of prescriptive ways, and really take risks in being able to engage with folks in Puerto Rico, engage throughout the diaspora, and have those conversations. And I think that the opportunity with the hurricane, and I actually had a good conversation with Iram about this in terms of his critique around how some Puerto Ricans engaged, and I don't know if you want to talk about that, in Puerto Rico afterwards, but I think for me, it did create a bridge that that wasn't really very strong, at least in my experience. And that bridge was because we were basically, you know, the ones doing all, like, the diaspora was bringing all this, like, necessary food and aid, and we were suffering alongside our folks there. And so we were looking for ways to try to support, and it did create a bridge, it did create opportunities to work together. And for me personally, I was incredibly inspired by the movement of the CAMs, the Centro de Apoyo Mutuos, and how people were able to utilize those spaces throughout the islands to really take care of each other, because they had to, right? And so I think that mirrors the way that we do that here. So to me, there was already like, okay, I see you. I see what you're doing. We do that too. And so thinking about it in those terms to me is really important, like for us to engage in an honest conversation about, like, we're in this together. And I think somebody was talking about internationalism, right? Like, we're in this together. Like, we have to figure this out. It is a numbers game too, right? Like, so one of the things about it is, if we're gonna build power, we have to be able to connect to larger groups of people. And also, we can't leave people behind. So we have to figure out a way to engage, as hard and difficult as it is when we're trying to figure out the word in Spanish or the word in English. And so, yeah, I just wanted to uplift that.
Bueno, yo me quería referir a la pregunta de a dónde va a estar Puerto Rico en 20 años, que le hizo un compañero allá. Y perdone lo del patch, es que si no me pongo el patch veo doble. Y me dijeron que había doble la cantidad de personas que están aquí. Y yo dije, a ver, María. Perdona lo del patch. Mire, yo fui miembro del Comité Central del Partido Socialista Puertorriqueño. Y por muchos años esa organización decía que había una crisis inminente del colonialismo. Y tenía hasta una consigna de independencia ya, socialismo ahora mismo. O sea, ahora claro, hindsight is 2020. Pero eso de caracterizar una situación en Puerto Rico como de crisis o de momento de insurrección o de la crisis del colonialismo, tuvo un impacto en la izquierda puertorriqueña y su dispersión. Hoy en día en Puerto Rico, yo paso mucho tiempo en Puerto Rico, la izquierda puertorriqueña, el independentismo en Puerto Rico, está sumamente débil, debilitado, sin poder de convocatoria, mientras que las masas puertorriqueñas están, por ejemplo, estamos hablando de la espontaneidad, spontaneity, y esa es la situación aquí también. O sea, la izquierda puertorriqueña, podemos entrar en muchas razones, hoy en día se encuentra disperso, sin organización, estamos por todos lados. Yo lo único que quiero dejar es que la acción es más importante que una cuestión teórica de momento revolucionario. Yo vivo en New Jersey desde el 79. Yo estoy activo en todos los eventos comunal de esa comunidad. El año pasado fui el padrino del desfile puertorriqueño. Si ustedes quieren llevar la organización, tiene que estar envuelto en la lucha diaria, cotidiana de los puertorriqueños en este país. En este país. No hay que mirar con una visión de Puerto Rico, porque ya, como dijo Iris, ya somos más aquí que allá. El futuro de Puerto Rico está no solamente en Puerto Rico, o sea, está aquí, en las manos de esos 5 millones. de puertorriqueños que van a decidir también el futuro de Puerto Rico, estando aquí, quedándose aquí, viviendo aquí en los próximos 100 años. Eso es una realidad. Y eso nosotros tenemos que salir de aquí, sí que hay que organizar, pero tenemos que estar envueltos. No, yo no tengo un crystal ball. Yo no sé si se va a poder realinear la izquierda puertorriqueña en Estados Unidos. Como dijo Carlito, we just started talking to each other. yeah, 2 years ago. That's a movement forward. I don't know what's going to come of it, but you know, we're starting to move. But we got to become not just Puerto Rico centered. We got to become Puerto Rican centered. You know, some of us speak Puerto Rican in English, but we still speak Puerto Rican. And we got to talk about the reality here, not just Puerto Rico.
So I think I just want to kind of get to a wrap. With everything that everyone has said, but I think that what's significant is tonight. This is the starting point. And it's a space where I hope that we continue to grow and to expand on this space. And if we want to see where we can begin to get some answers to where we can find linkages to actions, to issues, to important things that are happening here in the United States, this is where it begins. And so I think that what Jose has just finished saying, we ourselves have just begun this dialogue with one another. It's a dialogue, and it's a discussion, and it's a coming together, and it's a getting to know one another. Not even getting to know one another again. It's getting to know one another now. And that's important. That's important. That we were able to do something like this collectively, understanding that we were not here to talk about each of our organizations. We were here to talk about the movement. We were here to talk about a period of history. And that's the beginning. This was a discussion about history. It's the history of the past, and it's a history of a future that we hope to make. And that is where I think, and I'm very happy that we were able to bring Iram and Teresa, and hopefully we will extend this now to many others who are doing work in the communities. That's our hope. That is what we wanted as a goal to be able to pursue tonight. And that's something that I think we are all committed to. So this is the beginning. This is the first step. And we just need to continue this dialogue.
I would like to just say a few words in closing. I think the fact that you are here, and if you look at each other, take a moment, look at each other, look in the back, look in the front. There's a hell of a lot of interest in this subject, and that's a good thing. And also the variety of people that are here, from Puerto Rico, acaban de llegar, los que están aquí mucho tiempo, los que hablan inglés, los que hablan español. That's a good thing. And as everyone has said, and Carmen said, to conclude, you know, we are each other's treasures. And sometimes what has happened is that we do not treat each other like that. What was beautiful about working in this experience was that we treated each other like that. We were very respectful of each other's opinions, and you can imagine that we had differences. But you know, the reality is not so many. Why? Why? We had certain principles. We believed in the independence of Puerto Rico. We believed in internationalism. We're anti-capitalist. We're anti-imperialist. We stand for gender justice. We stand against racism. And that was our foundation. The other thing that we believe, and every one of us has said it, take some action. Get to know your next door neighbor, maybe. Begin somewhere. The Young Lords began with garbage. El Comité began with housing. Everybody begins somewhere. But at the end of the day, we need to connect all of those struggles. We have principles. I think we're all united on those basic principles, and that's what we bring people to, and we build mass movements. That was our strength in that time. And the decline of our movements were not just our internal failings, it was also the conditions that we were living. Because it was not just the Puerto Rican movement that declined, the whole movement around the world was destroyed. And we're in a moment right now just like that. And everyone has talked about the new challenges, the heightened surveillance, for example, that we didn't deal with at that level, that you're recorded every single moment of the day. So we have new challenges before us, but we have new energy. Wherever you are, begin your organizing. And the other thing is we've got to begin to talk to each other and treat each other like the society, the revolutionary society that we want to live in. Not treat each other like we're with disdain or with envy or with disgust or take each other for granted. We are each other's treasures. Our survival depends on us. Que viva Puerto Rico libre, and thank you so much. Those of you that are interested, fill out your cards so that we can get together or find ways to bring people together for future events if you're interested in organizing.
Name and electric, what is it? The
email.
Email.
Okay.
Hey, David, you gotta give me that photo. Judy, we can talk about it. We're not gonna stop it? No, we're not gonna stop everything today.
Great job. Everybody did good.